Hey everyone, welcome to my basement and my playroom. Today we are going to go through the lesson for root and fish that we went through on Sunday, April 19th. So we're going to be talking about different families in scripture for the next couple weeks because let's face it, you're going to be stuck with your families at home for the next couple weeks. So what I want you to think about first is to think of one word, and I want you all to think about it, okay? Write it down, maybe, that would describe a normal family. So, what you would think of as a normal family. Now, when we did this live, we got a lot of different responses. We got loving, we got supportive, we got weird, lots of different things. Now, growing up, I was pretty embarrassed of my family. I thought they were so weird. First, we lived next to a church, so there was always the awkward, like, why do you live next to a church? And do you live in the church thing? But also, can I just say, we never had good snacks, like, or lunch stuff. Like, I had friends, and we would go over their house, and their friends' parents, they would make like macaroni and cheese and hot dogs. They would have snack drawers. They always had chicken nuggets in the freezer. And at my house, it was like, if you're hungry, make yourself a sandwich. There's lunch meat in the fridge and peanut butter and jelly. And I thought that was just lame. We also had rules that we had to follow. And if I didn't follow them, even if there were friends over, I would get in trouble. The rules still stood. Sometimes I would go over to my friend's house and like their parents like wouldn't yell at them in front of their friends, or they'd pull them aside, or they'd send their friends home, whatever. If I was in trouble, my friends would go home right then, and I got in big trouble. I thought it was so weird. It seemed like my friends never got in trouble, at least not in front of us. But I thought my parents were really weird because of it. Maybe it was normal, I don't know, but I thought it was weird. So there were lots of things like that whenever my friends came to sleep over. Other parents would like go out and get special sleepover snacks. My parents wouldn't. If I wanted snacks, I had to get them myself. Whenever my friends went to the mall, they got money to spend and I got nothing. It was just weird. Everything about my family felt like it was weird and like we were not a normal family. We weren't typical. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being so weird that you can barely stand it, like not a good weird, but like you're embarrassed by them weird, I want you to think about how you would rate your family. I probably would have rated my family at like a 3.5 or a 4. I couldn't cope with how weird I felt like my family was. So, like I said, I thought my family was super weird, but there were a couple of families that I wished my family was like. There were two in particular. Their parents were good, they all came to church, they were kind, they always had the good snacks, and they had pools, and they had family fun nights, and this was one of the families with a snack drawer. And seriously, my friend was allowed to eat anything in the snack drawer. There were chips and candy and pretzels and chocolate and like fruit gummies and fruit roll-ups, and I always wondered, why can't my family be like their family? I want to know if you've ever wished your family was more like a friend's family. I have. Here's the thing though. God put me in my family. God actually chose me to be a part of the family that I'm in, and God chose for my parents to raise me, which is a pretty cool thing. I spent a lot of time wishing that I could be in another family or dreaming about what my family could be like instead of actually positively contributing to my own family culture, like being nice instead of sitting in my room and sulking. Like saying, hey, could we have like a family movie or a family game night instead of just like being snarky and wishing things were different and not understanding why my family couldn't be like everyone else. Here's the thing. God put you in your family in this time in history. So what are you doing to make the most of your time with them? But I don't want to spend the whole time talking about my family. I actually want to talk about the first family that God created. When God designed the first family, He designed them to live in closeness with God and in closeness with each other. When they were in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, they were They walked around with God. They lived with God. They were designed to be physically and relationally close to God and physically and relationally close to each other. That was always the goal, which is interesting, right? Because the two commandments that Jesus gives us are love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And really, the way God designed us was literally to be physically and relationally close to him in the same place. But as you already know, Adam and Eve got kicked out of Eden because they were being disobedient. They lost their innocence. Living in the Garden of Eden, hanging out with God, all that, they got kicked out, and instead they gained shame and sin and a difficult life. And when Adam and Eve started their relationship, there was with God, there was hope and promise, and they lived in perfection. But eventually, it turned into pain and loss and hurt relationships and brokenness. But despite their mistakes, God didn't leave them hopeless. It was time for them to start a family. God could have wiped them out and called it a failed experiment, but he didn't. He kicked them out, but he gave them a new start. So we see God's grace from the very beginning in the first family that God shows us. So anyway, they left the Garden of Eden. They started their family. Eve first gave birth to Cain and then gave birth to Abel. Imagine having your parents be the first people who disobeyed God, which is probably way more embarrassing and weird than not having good snacks, if I'm really being honest. But anyway, you guys know what happened to Cain and Abel, right? They both offered offerings to God. Abel's offering was the firstborn of his flock, and it was accepted by God. And Cain, the older brother, offered an offering of some of his harvest, and his offering was rejected by God. So what was the difference between Cain and Abel's offerings? It can be really easy to just assume that it's because one was meat and one was just some of his harvest, or maybe God was being picky, or maybe it's who offered it first or second. You know, first is the worst, second is the best, third is the one with the treasure chest. But it's actually because Abel offered the firstborn animals, the best of his flock, and Cain offered some of his harvest, not the first, not the best. God always wants us to bring our best. We also see that from the very beginning because he wants us to be relationally close with him, right? We always try to bring our best to the people that we are closest to, our most energy, our most fun selves. How are you bringing your best to God right now during this quarantine? Are you spending time with God, or are you giving him just like the last 5 minutes of your day that you have? Anyway, Cain did not like that Abel brought his best and that he didn't. He didn't want to bring God his best at that time, I guess. And maybe he just didn't want the expectation of it. So he cut down the competitor, right? He killed Abel and God punished him. He told him he was going to be a wanderer, that he was going to be restless, which I cannot imagine a worse punishment, that he'd never feel settled. You know, when I think about Adam and Eve and their family story and everything that happened, it's a little bit cringy. We can think about all the bad things that happened. We think about their disobedience and the punishments and the consequences that story meant for us, that sin was brought into the world. Maybe we think about the murder of Abel and the consequences of that. But what we don't necessarily always think about, or maybe what I don't always think about, is how God used this family and didn't leave this family hopeless despite their disobedience. Their story was not defined by their worst moments. Their worst moments are just a part of their story. Their story is so much greater than that. So Cain would go on to have kids who would have kids who would have kids who would have kids, and ended up that Noah was actually a descendant of Cain, you know, like Noah and the ark, right? Noah was a man of God who built the ark. He listened to God. He saved animals and people by following God's call and repopulated the earth. Noah's family was the one family at that time who was striving to be obedient to God. Adam and Eve's family, sin came out of Adam and Eve's family, but it grew into obedience. And then later in Luke, thousands of years later, we see Adam and Eve as descendants of Jesus himself. A family that brought sin and disobedience into the world led to the Savior of the universe who came to conquer sin and death. God doesn't define us by our families, and God doesn't define us by our worst moments. The book of Romans says that because of Because of Adam and Eve, sin increased, but grace increased all the more. So let me say it a different way. Even though through Adam and Eve, disobedience to God increased, God's unmerited, undeserved, unending love increased all the more. When sin increased, God's love increased all the more, which is a pretty cool thing. God didn't give up on Adam and Eve or Cain, and he won't give up on you. Despite our mistakes, God doesn't leave us hopeless. Despite what we're feeling, God doesn't leave us alone. God used Adam and Eve's family to conquer sin and death forever through Jesus. An amazing reminder that any person or family, no matter how weird or imperfect or not so typical or maybe even cringy, can still be used by God and redeemed through God, which is pretty awesome. So some things that I want you to think about. How did God redeem Adam and Eve's story? How did God redeem Cain's story? Do you still believe that God could use someone like Cain to further God's story for good? What do you think the difference is between being a descendant of Adam and Eve and being part of Christ's family? And what are you? Are you part of Christ's family? What does that mean? What does that look like for you? And lastly, how are you contributing positively to your family culture when you're at home right now? Are you being frustrated? Are tensions high? Are you sulking in your room? Or are you positively contributing? Are you bringing up conversation topics at the dinner table? Are you offering family game nights? Are you doing random acts of kindness for people in your house? Are you doing your chores without being asked? What kind of things are you doing to support your family culture at this time and to make it a little bit easier for everyone? Because let's face it, this is hard on all of our families. But even this situation can be used by God and redeemed through Him. And we can do our part to show God in our actions every day. All right, hopefully I will see you on a Zoom call sometime soon, but if not, it's been great being with you virtually here, and hopefully this quarantine ends soon and I can get to see you. Bye.